Hey there, welcome to episode 51 of the Quaggling Sand audio program. I am your host, Dan Hugo. We are recording this at 11:11. Oh, that's weird. 11:11 a.m. on Wednesday, 30 October 2024. Another month about to end. Is something going on tomorrow? I can't remember. Today, we're going to, it seems timely, seems like a reasonable time to do it ahead, not behind, not after the upcoming 2024 general election. I'm going to talk about my politics in case you're curious. No, this is not going to be a political advocacy episode. This is a history, if you will, personal history. How I got to today over the years. It's fairly cursory, but something to reflect on for posterity down the road later. Hopefully, wherever you found this audio program, you will find the episode description, which is where the show notes are. I only have the usual two self-promotion links. Today, I didn't want to make this a study project, so just me. There are a couple of references I will make later that you can check out if you want, but only for the motivated. By the way, if you're not already aware, quaggling sand is a term I coined recently. I think I was about 4 years old, maybe. I don't know. I gotta verify that someday, but really not knowing is part of the fun, perhaps. It was a while ago. Quaggling sand. If you are not familiar with what this is already, you may have heard it called pins and needles. The sensation when circulation returns to a limb, a hand, a foot, when you've been sitting on it, laying on it, sleeping on it, etc. Quaggling sand. Reflections on me. Now, I don't know what the subtitle is. That's not really it, but it is kind of it. So hopefully, you're able to see the summary, which I will read to you now. The links I will go through very quickly because you've heard them before, hopefully, or you'll hear them again next week and in my other audio programs. But the show notes, the summary for today's episode, my politics. Election season 2024 is about to come to an end of the beginning. But is it the beginning of the end? We may all know soon enough. This time around, in the meantime, it is worthwhile, I think, for each of us to ponder how we got here and why by taking a look at our own politics. I'll go first. So in other words, why do you think what you think? Or why do you have the positions you have? And I'm not going to delve into each thing. I kind of do that less specifically or less overtly in other discussion, presentation. But so this is a 50,000 foot view over many years. But yeah, why do you think, or why are you in a particular political party? Why do you feel you have a particular political leaning, et cetera, et cetera? These are all self-reflection, although I think it's something people could talk about more rather than just assuming. It's very tribal. You assume just because someone is in the same political party as you that you might, we think the same way, when it's very likely that you have differences of opinion. And those differences of opinion might be interesting. If people would discuss these rather than fighting over them immediately, there might be some positive outcomes from that. Who knows? Debate. What could possibly, not YouTube debates. I mean, actual debate, discussion, even argument. But for today, it is only me in a monologue, so there will be very little arguing. Oh, maybe some, but mostly just some reflecting on a couple of decades worth of political and really mostly not political thinking. Thinking of politics. Politics by itself is a game, literally. Politicians play politics. It's negotiation. It's storytelling. It's crafting public opinion of your constituents, your constituency, the electorate at large, your colleagues, trying to form coalitions, temporary or otherwise, in your governing body. So if you're in Congress, you can caucus with the Democrats or you can caucus with the Republicans, but you may have a different agenda, but you're a third party perhaps. So politics is a game, literally, game theory and everything. But political anything as it enters the public discourse, I think, is a different thing. It's really just something that we argue about and we cast aspersions immediately on any politician as by default a teller of half and mistruths, and that's probably, unfortunately, not far off. But all that said, I'm going to read the 2 links really quickly, and then we can get started and then reach the end that much sooner. The links, as always, you are not obligated to spend any money, but I do have buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo and Ko-fi.com, ko-fi.com/Dan Hugo with some stuff that I've been working on and hopefully will roll out soon. I don't know if there's one particular thing that will roll out or if I'll start to put some ducks in a row, as they say. But I'll start using these more just as a way to engage more people. Open source project people use both of these platforms to engage their users, offer them an opportunity to support in one way or another. Either way, I do have a list of all of my audio programs and other projects on my buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo profile page. So that's really what I've used it for mostly. I do have a list of my favorite coffee beans, not for you to buy for me, but rather just to point out that I do use coffee, and it is what powers my projects. And any funding that does arrive through either of these tools does indeed go towards coffee or a coffee-related accoutrement device. I would love to get a new mocha pot, to be honest. The mocha pots I have were cheap, and you don't really have to spend a lot of money on them. They're aluminum. But I did not get like Bialetti. They're just knockoff mocha pots. And I have found the seals are not great. If you're not familiar with the mocha pot, they're about as dead simple as you can get for making coffee. The silicone seal seems not high quality. It discolors immediately, very difficult to clean. I don't know if it's overly porous. And the finish inside between the basket and the upper chamber, very rough. I don't know if it's supposed to be like that, but it's difficult to clean because it's not smooth aluminum. It's pitted almost. And then the inside. I mean, the inside is fine. The inside of the water chamber is very off-putting. It looks like it's just unfinished inside, so it looks nice from the outside. Anyway, yeah, mocha pot, that would probably be an accessory that I would ponder at this point. But I got everything else. I just get coffee beans and make coffee now and then, which I've done an episode about, I believe. Maybe I'll do another. All that said, you can check out my other programs. I do produce 4 audio programs each week. And fun fact, we have 2 things going for Innovate for Vegas Foundation. I do Let's Innovate for Vegas is for our nonprofit, so I don't put my these 2 links on that. That's a totally separate thing, but I do link to it on these, so you can find it. Let's Innovate for Vegas, and there are 2 things that will probably lead to non-weekly programs, whether audio or more of a. Probably would make sense to have more of a group chat, like a video chat or something, sort of like a developer meetup or just a jam session where because they're projects that will involve engagement with other people to enable more engagement with other people. So we'll see what comes of that. You heard it here first, but you'll read about it on one of those 2 sites, maybe both, something coffee related. Either way, let's get to the beginning. Let's get started. One of those, pick one. Early memories. I recall in the most vaguest, is that a word? The vaguest sense, the notion of a President Ford. But I would say honestly that Carter is the first president I can legitimately say that I remember. I definitely remember hearing about the hostage situation in Iran. So I wouldn't say that I remember Carter being elected, but I remember towards the end of his term. And I remember hearing that Reagan saved the day, Ronald Reagan. Now, I should point out here that I grew up in a rather Republican household, so Republican, right-leaning, not overtly, not daily discussions on the joys of the Republican Party or whatnot, but Reagan was the more popular. No velvet paintings of Reagan in the house, but Reagan fans, Republicans. So there was no immediate jump to October surprise around this time. Nobody thought about, well, I'm not going to say nobody. I was, how old was I? Like 9. But for the casual child observing our political system at the time, the politics of presidential elections and whatnot, the notion of October surprise did not uh, rear its head. Although I think soon after, I remember hearing that, maybe the Reagan campaign did something or whatever, and it turns out there was backroom dealing and so on. But anyway, Reagan was my president all the way into nearly the end of high school, which is formative years. So I remember more of the news, the headlines, the assassination attempt, of course, the Mondale debate, the hot mic where he suggests bombing will commence shortly, and much later some of the oddities like, and I did review a 15-second clip to make sure I got this right, and I did remember. I'm sure I've heard the quote since, but the incident where I believe they were at their ranch in California, I think, and First Lady Nancy Reagan is standing to President Ronald Reagan's right. There are cameras and press, and they're asking him something, and you clearly hear Nancy Reagan, like ventriloquist style, saying, "We're doing everything we can," and then he says it, immediately after, because he was having trouble putting a couple of words together into a sentence, and that's the way it goes. Much like the Kennedy presidency, the Kennedy administration, the press was fairly friendly to the notion that behind the scenes the president wasn't all that was being portrayed. We know Kennedy was not a monogamous kind of guy, and we know Reagan later in his presidency was didn't have the best memory, wasn't thinking quite clearly perhaps, and I think all that has been made clear for both of these characters and for other presidencies. The truth comes out eventually, or some version of it. So either way, I remember that more contemporaneously. So interesting. I was still not so engaged in politics, though, despite learning about the reasons one should be in my various history, civics, and related classes through my public education. When I was in third grade, I think, was it in third grade or fifth grade? I think it was fifth grade. We had different groups of people, different groups of students. It was a double classroom. I think it was fifth grade, maybe. The two teachers, well, my fifth grade teachers were Carnes and Delfgau, and they had a bring a newspaper. No. You know what? It was third grade. It was not fifth grade. Why? Because we did it in sixth grade also when I had the same teacher. So the Raker team classroom in third grade had you'd form groups of recurring. So divide the room up into 5 groups for Monday through Friday. And then within those groups, each student had to, on the given day, bring in a newspaper article and summarize it. So like a mini book report, mini news anchor. And the lucky one would get the weather, which was always funny. Pick your favorite city and tell us the precipitation. But it would be national, international, sports, local, things like, so different topics, enough so that each person on the team had something to talk about, and they would rotate it around. So, and then we did it again in sixth grade because I had Miss Reeker, Debbie Reeker, and I've talked about this before. Debbie Reeker passed away a few years ago, unfortunately. She was a pretty solid teacher. So, but you would think that would have had some sort of impact earlier, having that news interest seeded. Turns out no, it would take many years, but then later, it does pay off to pay attention to what's going on. We had a really good civics teacher when I was in junior high school, Vic Columbi, and he also has passed away long ago, I think. Vietnam veteran, lost one leg below the knee, one above the knee. He made no, I was going to say no bone, but no, I won't make that. Not in a negative way, but he was absolutely open and transparent. In fact, one day we were having a remember these slideshows, the little slide projector where one of the students turns the crank to advance the slides. So it was something from a Vietnam history curriculum kit of some sort. And he's sitting at the desk, and he always used to put his legs up, at least one, on like a stool, I guess, is more comfortable, perhaps. And he had lost some parts of fingers, so he used to refer to them as his stubbies. And we're going through this slide. I don't know if he had seen it before. Didn't seem like it at the time. I think I was in 8th grade, so memory being what it is. And he's looking at the slide. He goes, "Wait a minute." And he's looking at it. He goes, "I think I was here for this." that was you would think teachers like that would be more highly valued. I think that was sort of a throwaway thing, but really a teacher who has lived experience that can be shared with a classroom should not be undersold. Anyway, so I had a couple of good teachers, and then I had a really awful teacher named Ted Mounts, for example. So I had the spectrum. I had different types and levels of skill and interest in teaching history and government and so on. I recall some of the Dukakis silliness, the tank ad with the helmet thing and the debate. No, was it a debate question or press? Anyway, so I remember Dukakis being unimpressive. The sitting vice president, George H.W. Bush, was a little bit more like, they were both kind of like nerdy, but he was a little bit more put together. So it seemed like back then being the sitting vice president had a little bit more gravitas, even though the role of vice president is severely boring, technically. But when Bush won, I think the Homestead remained pleased with the right-leaning executive branch, so everybody was fine. I only knew the name Tip O'Neill, by the way, so from Congress, and I know that Reagan and Tip were buddies, were friends, and of course, looking back, this level of interaction between two political parties, especially two political party leaders as they were, is unheard of. Arguably, one of the upsides of having Joe Biden as the president after serving so long in Congress, he had a more friendly or at least collegiate relationship with the Senate and arguably some of Congress in general. But certainly, a takeaway from this time period was, these two old guys hanging out, and much would be made of that. But I still was not keeping track of anything congressional. No, I had no idea really what, aside from it's a bicameral legislature, the Great Compromise, to 435, 100, all the stats and the technical makeup and so on, but really wasn't paying attention. So I went off to college, and as I headed off to college, Bush 41 was about to get into his second year. For the entire first year of college, we had no televisions except none handy except for the group watching of The Simpsons and Married with Children, which had just come out, which had just premiered in there somewhere. So that was very popular. So somewhere in our dorm, someone would plug in a television and everybody would all watch. I think it was on Sunday night, right? Our dorm had a subscription to Weekly World News because why take news seriously? We had better things to do, which is true, actually. So it's safe to say that keeping up with world events, including politics, was not at the top of the list. Homework was. Coming back for second semester, my second year, we had a television and a couple of couches in our room, so we'd watch TV more, but not news. We were not really watching the national or international news by any stretch, except when Desert Shield became Desert Storm, which brought many dorm neighbors in to watch the events unfold. Much consternation about a potential draft. I remember a friend of mine actually saying that, oh my God, they could do a draft. We're draft age. So there was actual, and this is from a person who was most definitely not concerned about the draft generally, but this sprang into his mind, and I'm sure it sprang into many minds, and it was interesting times. Since I was not yet 18 for the 1988 Bush-Dukakis race before I went off to college, My first occasion to cast a ballot for president was in 1992. Given the war and our collective dislike of the status quo, there was no particular political discussion. It was purely practical. I was not thinking like, oh, I really like the policies on the left versus the right. It was really just this war is bad, and Bush 41 seemed very stoic, or like just didn't sit right. So again, no real analysis, no political or even practical consideration. If there was any consideration, it may have been purely practical. I don't like this guy, but I don't like the war. Not that changing to a different president fixes that, but yeah. Who is this guy from Arkansas about? What's he doing? So I believe I did vote for Clinton as my first presidential ballot. Not a friend of mine. I voted and I was on to other things. I was looking towards graduating and eventually moving to Silicon Valley, which I did not know at the time, but that's how things worked out. The Clinton-Gore doublet, they were in for the beginning of my career and for the duration of my first tour of duty in the Bay Area. With Al Gore having invented the internets, of course, the road ahead looked interesting, and the speed limit was very nearly that of the light, of C. Speed of light, C. Very fast. Internet speed, as they would say. Still not so much keeping up with the news daily, but there is more access to material as the internet comes online, if you like. So there was no reason not to be more engaged. I used to take, somewhere in there, I took a subscription to the Wall Street Journal, and they quite literally just piled up because I had no time to sit down and learn about the goings on. Well, the Wall Street Journal does have a particular perspective, maybe. Sometimes it's a little off the rails, but back then I figured, I should try to figure out what's going on in the world, and I failed miserably. I did travel. I did, during my time in the first tour of duty in Silicon Valley, I did travel to Japan for True Vision, and I traveled to France for SCM Microsystems. So I did get out of the Domestica. That was interesting. I think generally speaking, if people traveled more, they'd have a little bit more, I'll say more centrist view. I think by taking a look at different perspectives and different places and different circumstances and so on, I think it's very easy to see how other people might view. It's always an abstraction. People in Finland or Sweden or anywhere in Northern Europe are much happier because something, right? So if you actually go to places and talk to people, you can understand a little bit better their perspective of things. I'm like, the headlines are interesting, but day-to-day life is like this, and it differs from ours, and so on. So I think those were useful elements of my becoming more aware of what's going on around, and not necessarily impacting my political leanings, my party affiliation, if there was one, but just more about how to observe things, life, considerations, and so on. It wasn't really, though, like tracking things, more kind of just learning along the way. Like the Democrats in the White House, my time in Silicon Valley would come to an end in 2001. In my case, I moved back to the Phoenix area in the summer, with my finale in the Bay Area officially in August of 2001. The final billable hours, the last of the sundries thrown into a car for the one-way drive home. Little did I know, strangely, everything seemed to have taken a turn in September 2001, when world events, geopolitics, and who knew what when, why did this happen, how did that person get so much power there with affiliation here, I'm talking about Dick Cheney, or Osama bin Laden, one of those, or Osama, however you say his name. And the list goes on. For what should be obvious reasons, this was an inflection point. When I was living in Phoenix, I returned to Phoenix, grew up in the West Phoenix area, through high school, off to college in Southern California, moved to Silicon Valley, and now back to Phoenix during the dramatic downturn in our economy, the dot bomb era, coupled with the attacks of 9/11 and so on. So I lived in Phoenix from 2001 to 2005. the Bush years bringing me through that time and back to Silicon Valley for part 2. Phoenix at the time was generally Bush country. Maybe all of Arizona. That's hard to say. I think probably, well, I don't know. I really don't know. As far as individuals, electoral college outcomes are different. I don't know what popular votes and person on the street leanings were, but definitely, Bush was very popular during his tenure, a wartime president of an attacked country. Imagine being popular. The defender, the great defender. I will say, I will give him credit. I mean, I think George W. Bush 43, as he's often called, I think he was sincere, but not completely competent. So I don't think he was he's no Dick Cheney. But, Dick Cheney actually, I believe, is from another world, and not a good one. But, yeah, George W. Bush seems like a decent human being, except for all the war crime stuff and the prisoner interrogations and the what was it, rendering, when they would fly prisoners to other countries where I was going to say tourism, where torture is legal. Was that rendering? Either way. Is that rendering? Now I got to look that up. So, yeah, I don't know if he got into this to be a part of those things. I think he was probably total speculation. I think he was influenced by the likes of Cheney and who was the deputy secretary of defense, I think it was, the super neocon guy, totally spacing on his name. Torture rendering? Is that what it is? Oh, rendition. Extraordinary rendition. So rendering, sort of. Yeah, so that's my sense. I don't really know. So I wouldn't look for a useful opinion from George W. Bush unless it was about painting or public speaking. But I will give him credit for dodging the 2 shoes that were thrown at him. I think now he doesn't get all that credit, goes away for his response, deer in headlights, when they were reading the book upside down to the kids. Yeah, but 2 shoes were thrown at him during a presser in somewhere in the Middle East. I don't remember where. And he just ducked, and then they kind of went on as if it was like, I don't know what would happen today. That would be Twitter and YouTube would be exploding. But at the time, it was just like, whoa. And so that was fun. Good times in a sea of bad times. I think there wasn't a lot of discussion going on other than, everything was 9/11 centric for a while. I was very, very clear that war profiteering was going on with Halliburton. That was just kind of gross, which had some suspicious connections, if I recall correctly, to the sitting vice president at the time, Dick Cheney, who, by the way, was the chair of the committee to select the vice president. And who knew he would pick himself? That's crazy. It's years earlier. So, yeah, I think the war profiteering is one of those things, among other dramatically bad. I mean, really, Dick Cheney and what's his name? I'm totally spacing once again. Henry Kissinger. Why am I spacing on names? I got to read more. I think if Cheney and Kissinger had like an arm wrestling session, it would be epic if they were capable. I think Kissinger passed away, which probably made some deity somewhere very proud. So yeah, I don't think those are good people. That's my opinion. Between this and some unusual details coming around, who knew what when, what we would do today, what we would call today a radical policy failure of the handling of available intelligence information, and the expansion of the war efforts from attacks on Al-Qaeda to attacks on Iraq. Like, those are now comedic bits about, whoops, we hit the wrong country or whatever. But paying attention to the goings on amongst our leaders seemed more important at that point. So in that context, it was a little bit more of a, what is going on here? I almost forgot. The Supreme Court stopped the count for Bush Gore. This was a great learning experience, preparation for what we will most likely go through a few more times. the 9/11 events would push this to a back burner. That is, I know the count came first. Sitting Vice President Gore, arguably, in the error margins and whatnot. So the Florida vote was halted, hanging chads and whatnot. And really, let's be honest, if I was going to make a completely centrist, completely legitimate, politics-free statement this many years later, we should figure out ballots and voting once and for all so that it's transparent, so that it's fail-safe. We are now seeing headlines today about ballot drop boxes being arsoned, like going up in flames. We should figure this out. This and paper. See, the IRS got away from paper tax returns. That's good. Now you, as long as you have your Social Security number, which everyone on the planet has, thanks to every breach that's ever happened. So your Social Security number is no longer yours. So as long as you have that number and your address, also compromised many times, and some other fairly basic information, somebody can file your tax return for you. So the infrastructure of our government, including something as fundamental as ballot collection and counting reliably, transparently, so that there isn't immediate controversy at every step, this is something that should be figured out. And someday somebody will, but probably not. So the Supreme Court decided to halt the recount, and because 9/11 was going on, starting soon after, it was basically, oh yeah, whatever. Okay, well, we have the president we have. Let's stop thinking about ballots. And I don't know who would have handled what better. It's hard to say. I think Gore was a little bit too eager to accept, without any real argument, some of his climate change claims. Now, some of his claims are verifiable. Some of them are a little bit excessive, maybe politically motivated. There's all sorts of discussion about the sources and whatnot. And so that would have been worthy of consideration, but complete and total policy failure regarding available intelligence information, as was conducted by the Bush administration and then the ensuing years. Things like voting became meh. Let's not worry about these things. We've got a war to fight. So, a little opinionated there. Yes, I am. I think voting should work better. Flawless at this point. Even sticking your finger in some ink seems to work better than what we have. Famously, the voting in, I think it was Afghanistan, right? Showcased in video essays and news reporting. You would stick your thumb in the ink to show that you voted. And I guess it would be your right thumb. No, your left thumb. It would have to be your left thumb, just to make sure. Returned to Silicon Valley for round 2 in late 2005, and soon we would make some history with the election of Barack Obama. So that's generally a good thing. I'm generally pro, I wish I could remember his name, the 43 white guys in a row bit that is done by, I think it's George Santiago, comedian. 43 white guys in a row, comedian. No, I've looked this up before. I think it's George. Is it George Santiago? I don't know. Anyway, he's got a bit. He's like, hey, they elected Obama. So now we're good, right? Everything's fair. I'm totally botching this joke, but now, in my opinion, we will reach equality when there have been 43 white guys in a row, so we should have 43, let's say, presidents of color, right? So ethnic presidents of some, not just your traditional white guy. I'm clearly simplifying his joke, but it was funny. He was telling it in a humorous way, so not Tony Hinchcliffe style, but it's kind of true. So yeah, I'm all for some diversity. We don't just need a bunch of old white guys leading everything all the time. So yeah, Barack Obama gets elected. That's good, generally good. He seemed like a nice person outwardly. We never really know. Community organizer and briefly a senator. So those are nice, I suppose. He was outwardly a decent person though. So that's all we could really tell at the time. There are always caveats with all politicians, always, all the time. There are a couple of gaping issues, so I'll bring up 2 from memory. First, he did, I remembered and then I wrote it down. So yes, these are my notes, but first he did bring in the usual suspects as economic advisors and whatnot, which is always a problem. Hey, we're going to do something new by bringing in the same old white guys, which was not great when the Great Recession rolled in. It would be many years later that I would read more about the actual mechanics of the complete and total failure, like ridiculous speculation and prime rate mortgage silliness and what was it, packaged, all the ridiculous money swapping and really, really reckless abandon. So it would be many years I read more about what had happened, and I was like, oh, this is ridiculous. But at the time, the impact on my corner of the economy was non-trivial, to say the least. So Silicon Valley was an expensive place to be, the Amazon product, as things turned weird with the economy. So right around that time is when I was pursuing Radio Sunnyvale, and as the economy continued to slip, it became difficult to ask people to become sponsors of this new idea. Oh, how about a local AM radio station right here in the heart of Silicon Valley, since we have no local media? And people are like, that is a great idea. I cannot spend money on anything. So kind of put the kibosh on that. So felt it personally. Second, Obama's foreign policy is worthy of a deep study and comparison by anyone, and that certainly has happened from a historical perspective, a part of the how did we get here timeline, to be sure, all the way to today. But of course it started before that, but certainly not really helpful, if I may say. Generally speaking, on the heels of the Bush 43 presidency, became more interesting what was happening at the other end of certain claims about withdrawals and changes in direction in the Middle East in particular, that appear not to have actually happened. Like, oh, we're going to withdraw from Afghanistan. We're going to shut down the detainee program at Guantanamo, and the list goes on. Drone strikes and other things. So it was almost like, and who am I to say, but almost like the young newcomer trying out some ideas and but being able to tell a good story. So I don't know. I have very mixed feelings overall. And again, I think he's a decent person, sort of, but some severe caveats. And again, with all politicians, I think it's difficult to find the real, like the Dave character from the movie Dave, Kevin Kline playing Dave. Anyway, today, oh wait, did I find it? Yeah. So, I still wasn't paying attention to Congress, or not really the Supreme Court, maybe a little bit now and then when it would make some news, but who's going to enable gay marriage, for example? Anyway, today, so we're almost coming to the end already. Today, I'm going to skip discussion about the post-Obama years in a similar way. Why did I write that? I don't even know. Since all of this is ongoing with the current race, which will be decided, if we are lucky, in the next couple of weeks, longer if we are not. Suffice to say, and nothing should be too surprising in the coming days, weeks, and months. So hang on. I think what I'm saying is I could very easily dive into the current race and my opinions, a variety of things, but like this entire presentation, I'm just kind of skimming over. I think discussion of some of the things would be interesting. The mechanics of this, which is constantly referred to as historic, is an understatement. This has been a crazy time. Like, it's only been a crazy time because it didn't fit the program. Let's be honest. 120 days, whatever the Harris-Walz campaign has ended up having since the declaration from Joe Biden that he would not be pursuing re-election, very Lyndon B. Johnson style, perhaps. 120 days. That seems like a fine amount of time. If you have somebody running for election for 2 years, people stop caring, and that's when you make bad decisions. So I'm kind of a fan of the very tight election process or campaigning process. But I'll touch on a couple of these later, but I'm also not a fan of political parties, nor of the Electoral College, nor Senate. the makeup, the way the Senate is constructed. So the Electoral College has a similar problem, and ranked choice voting. Yeah, so we'll get to all that briefly, but those are topics for another day, perhaps. I have taken a more active interest in the dysfunction of Congress. So the mod squad, no, whatever, the squad, the goings on of the speaker. Obviously, Mitch McConnell is an awful human being, mostly because, and again, the broken Senate. He is from a very small a state with a very small population, and he wields far too much power over the goings on of, well, the Senate, obviously, but just in general. Not to say that one person should not be able to make a difference, but the structure of the Senate is fundamentally broken, in my opinion. Great compromise, indeed. Yeah, the prevention of the justice appointment, the Supreme Court justice appointment of, ironically, Merrick Garland, who turns out probably moves at Supreme Court justice pace, not so much at Attorney General. And interest was redoubled when it continued to be put when McConnell continued to put all of his fingers on the scale all the time. So yeah, what is going on with these senators? And it was becoming extremely partisan, and it still is. The power imbalance in the Senate was made crystal clear, when it should have been all along. And the House has its own problems, but the 2-year election cycle makes it a little bit more interesting. And the fact that there's a larger number and they represent districts rather than entire states. Now the question is, when is 435 the correct number? And history will tell us there wasn't always, I mean, the makeup of these bodies has changed as the country grew and whatnot. So is 435 the correct number? And is the way, well, obviously, gerrymandering has led to some issues about drawing districts and whatnot, but how are different representatives selected for different areas? Should that be a concern? But the political party aspect of it is, but should it be a concern of the other people in other states? And it is important to remember that this is a states' rights thing. So go ahead and read the Federalist Papers if you are curious, and some of the history of the drafting of the Constitution after the initial Articles of Confederation. Was that what it was, right? I almost, yesterday when I was thinking about this, I was like, was it the Magna Carta? No, that's a very different document. The Articles of Confederation. If I could type. Articles of Confederation, the first Constitution of the United States, establishing the country's national government after it declared independence from Great Britain. The document was adopted by the Continental Congress in 1777. That was pretty soon after the Revolution started, and went into effect in 1781, remaining in place until the Constitution was adopted in 1789. Interesting. So it was a weak central government, and basically ceded a lot of power to the individual former colonies, now sovereign states. So the Constitution, as drafted by James Madison, would be a little bit more structured and was the result of some unfortunate negotiations, but got to do what you got to do. Luckily, none of those negotiations had long-lasting impact on history and today even. It should go without saying, but I'll say it anyway. The rise and corruption of social media, coupled with the demonstrable legacy media bias in reporting and not reporting news according to various agenda, has made tracking events and impacts, decisions and outcomes a real challenge for normal people. I have determined now, so while I stand at my standing desk, and if I'm not recording podcasts, I'm working on various aspects of a ton of initiatives, which is a cool word for projects. Sometimes code, sometimes not, sometimes different things. So a lot of things going on, so I can just have political banter or news of the day or other things playing in the background. So I'm not in an office setting where people might say, turn that down. So I have, and then of course I read a lot. I read a tremendous amount of online sort of news material. I read a lot of books. I love audiobooks now. The pandemic really planted that seed, and I've been germinating that seed. Basically every day. So I do audiobooks and I read actual reading all the time. So I believe I have more bandwidth to fill with such pursuits. I don't think most people take the time or have the inclination. So I think the replacement of intellectual curiosity and finding out what's really going on with this or that. We are yielding more to whatever our favorite talking head says. Oh, I'm a fan of Joe Rogan. Clearly, it's the best thing in the world when one of the candidates sits in his studio for 3 hours. Like, well, by the way, you should watch that interview with a critical eye and count the number of questions that are answered with actual answers. The whole interview could have, if that actually took place, could have been about 20 minutes, but it didn't. 3 hours, 3 hours of meandering. So that was, but people give the host and the session instant credibility because that's how social media is now. And it's unfortunate, I think. And of course the local media, the press, the mainstream media as it's called, is kind of a travesty. I think they've lost their way completely. Individual reporters, that's a different story. I think as in most avenues, most avenues and most corners of the world, there are individual people who are in it because they want to be in it and they want to do what they're supposed to be doing. So if you're in the press, you're supposed to attempt to present an impartial view. You yourself don't have to be impartial. Everybody's human and has bias, but to try to be fair in your presentation or at least disclose your bias, right? So individual reporters, investigative journalists, I think are becoming more rare. YouTubers claiming to be reporting the news, I think that's part of the problem. But anyway, it's very difficult now to keep track of what's going on if you don't have the time or inclination, or if you don't want to keep track of events that happen through the week can change drastically. So if you only pick up on whatever you've heard through the week and some sort of a rundown you might catch somewhere, you're getting a snapshot, but you're watching a still or a screen capture, but not the movie, right? So I think it's become tremendously challenging because there are more ways to get information and they're all being used, not in the best of ways. So it makes anyone who isn't firmly in one of the two major political camps, you basically have to track both sides. If you are a dyed-in-the-wool Republican or you are going to be Democrat forever, and this is a real thing, then you just have to watch your side of the reporting, which is biased. And it's unfortunate because it's not, if you do watch both sides, you'll see it immediately. Like, oh, you can see certain things are being emphasized, certain things are being diminished. And in the corresponding, according to the side of the reporting. So it's unfortunate, but that is the way it is. It's almost like saying, well, 1 + 1 is 1.5. No, it isn't. It's 2.5. It averages out to 2, but if one side wants it to be 1.5, that's what they're going to tell you, and the other side, yeah. I just made that up, so that may not be the best example. But either way, I didn't talk about, and literally when I was writing this, my notes, I said, I really got to put this in here. So while I'm saying that I forgot to talk about it, it's in my notes, but I did think, where should I put this? When I was in college, I took a class on the history of European unification. Yes. And you'd think, well, okay, history of European unification, what does that have to do with Democrats and Republicans? It was an interesting class. We learned about the very early days and the formation. Basically, it was an economic union. So the EU, the European Economic Community, the ECU, which was going to be the European Currency Unit, I think it was, which has now become the Euro. So yeah, there was a lot of interesting stuff about how all this negotiation took place. We had to do a final project, and so I decided, since we were at Harvey Mudd, we were doing clinic presentations, and in fact, I had a job by this point developing physical slides. So back in the day, you'd use Aldus Persuasion or Microsoft PowerPoint. Aldus Persuasion. Was it Adobe PowerPoint? Aldus. Microsoft bought one of those. Tells you how often I use Microsoft. Anyway, Aldus Persuasion was arguably the better device, and we had a slide printer. So it was a camera that would take a picture on film of each slide. So it took a while. And the montage slide printer. So the film would come out, we'd go into the darkroom, develop it, mount the slides, bam. So guess what I did for my final project? I created a slideshow, maybe it was about 20 slides, I think, demonstrating how a stable system, in as much as Europe was stable at the time, would make unification effort difficult, requiring adoption of ideas that would place stability at risk. So, by the way, I called it an engineering perspective of European unification. So essentially, I presented these images of like a ball in a bowl, so a sphere in a bowl, a stability well, right? So in order to change the status quo, you have to kind of upset this. And it's difficult to do when people are generally stably related and so on. The economy in Europe was what it was, but while there were there was probably more labor issues, like being able to work in other countries. But trade in the world, especially in the post-Myers-Briggs era, Myers-Briggs, that's a personality test. Myers-Briggs. Bretton Woods, post-Bretton Woods, and generally the development of global trading partners and long supply chains and so on. So, yeah, they wanted to sort of look into the future and whatnot, but really, I think it was more of a labor concern, and then just sort of being unified in the post-NATO. NATO's still around, but looking into the future, what's going to happen if we become a unified economic player rather than having individual countries. So okay, not awful thinking. It turned out to be more precarious than they probably envisioned. The obvious comparison, to really, and it was made during the class, and I'm sure it just generally came up, was colonial unification against Britain and King George, a common enemy, if you will, to motivate a concerted effort with military action with the militia and later, regular armies, George Washington and others. And of course, the creation of a new government with actual consensus, a consensus that would cause problems later, as I referred to. So if you can actually form a government from disparate colonies that each have their own take on what they would do and what they need and what they want and what they wouldn't put up with and so on. But if you can get everybody together to take on this common enemy, so you get some alignment, you get some collaboration, and then you say, oh, let's form a new government, and we'll give the states all the rights. And then, okay, wait, let's start over and let's give the states a little bit less rights, fewer rights, I guess. Anyway, the professor gave me a decent grade, but claimed my presentation was hand-waving. I thought I did a pretty good job of demonstrating visually what I was talking about. And while at the time I didn't argue, later I would reflect on this and realize that a unifying force is essential for enabling a movement. So really my point was not far off. My presentation was legitimate, real. I mean, I didn't think about this because I was like, I think he gave me like a B or something. I was like, okay, that's fine. But my point was actually legitimate. I was attempting to make a real point that I did believe in. So I wasn't merely hand waving. I just didn't argue it. If it can be a peaceful unifying force like unpopular tax policy, so I will point out that I am at this very moment in the middle of a book about the leading up to the American or the colonial Revolutionary War. I don't know who would call it which. So the Boston Tea Party was actually very specifically about the tea and the taxation. It was not about destroying property or theft even. Somebody was one of the participants in the Boston Tea Party was attempting to steal some of the tea from one of the crates that they broke open before they dumped them into the water, the harbor. So he was attempting to put some in a jacket of some sort, and they called him out for it. And there was some anger, but and I think there were threats being made about, well, I know because you were supposed to obscure your identity with the costumes, dressed as indigenous peoples and whatnot. So in one case, there was a padlock or a lock on a door on the cargo hold, I think it was. They broke the lock, but later replaced it because they didn't want to damage actually. So it was just a weird thing. But it was a unifying force that they didn't have to resort to like real physical violence against other people, especially at the time. That would come later. But to be able to get people on the same page with a peaceful agreement to unify an effort, like this is wrong. Like, yeah, we agree. Let's work together to right it. So that's one way to do it. But the Revolutionary War would come, and the rebels were quite focused at that point too. So the, uh, the militia from the colonies, what is this? They all seem to hate us, us in our red coats. So that can be a powerful unifying force that can really motivate participation and drive real change. And it could be something less good, like white nationalism or bigotry or nativism or any number of other us versus them possibilities. We saw those work in the 30s and 40s especially, but they work all the time. Division for the sake of division can be a real driver, and it can really motivate people. I'm sure we'll all hear about more of these things. We'll hear about more of it in the near term. It's that Kamala Harris. No, it's Kamala. Come on. I have read a lot of books over years leaning more into history and economics on top of the normal technology stuff I've always been interested in. I used to really not enjoy reading about history, and economics was just sort of well, of course I need to understand economics. That's part of engineering, and yeah. But it's actually more interesting than you would imagine, and it's actually as much a component of everything going on in the world as technology is, or maybe more. George Santayana has a great quote about history, which you've all heard, which I have referenced a few times in my other programs, and I will give it to you here. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. You will hear variations. Those who cannot remember history are doomed to repeat it, etc. It's similar, but not quite the same. It's from his book Life of Reason from 1905. And I checked it out of the library, and I will do that again because I gave it a cursory. I need to give it an actual legitimate read. Life of Reason, 1905, George Santayana, like Santa, Yana, with a Y. The quote is taken slightly out of context, but it's not egregious, so you should read the book. But I will say the quote stands on its own, and it is useful. And it's always useful to have a source for a quote that isn't like Gandhi or Einstein. So give it a read. But yeah, if you don't consider how things happened, how we got here, then they all might happen again. Or as George Lucas would tell you, they rhyme. For too many years, I was not paying attention to the whole government, which is a mistake in general that the vast majority of our population makes as well. Like nobody really pays attention until the day of. Yeah, we can argue that that's a lot to keep track of, and it most definitely is. But the tools exist in the modern day to make that easier. Not easy, but easier. If only they weren't used against us for profit motives, clout, political agenda, and worse. All the time, constantly. Check out Propaganda and Crystallizing Public Opinion by Edward Bernays. Edward Bernays, his uncle is... I totally forget his name again. I literally looked it up, so I wouldn't. It's thank you, Sigmund Freud. I didn't look it up, but in my memory device, if you want to know, it is Alan Alda, Hawkeye, in MASH, looking at their army psychiatrist, and his name is Sidney, and he calls him Sidney Freud at some point in one of the episodes. So Sigmund Freud's nephew, Edward Bernays. The books are Crystallizing Public Opinion and Propaganda. So these were from the 20s. No, Crystallizing Public Opinion was published in the 20s. Edward Bernays was actually brought in during the Wilson administration. Wilson had campaigned on a sort of an isolationist platform. And so, yeah, nobody wants to be involved in World War I. But then he said, we got to get into World War I. So how are we going to convince the public that it's a good idea? Because I don't want to have everybody turn on me. So they brought in Ed Bernays to talk about, well, how do we present this? And then the Lusitania was sunk by a U-boat. Who knows? So, yeah, how to manipulate public opinion without trying. And it's these things have been going on forever. If you look at some of the founders, the Thomas Jeffersons and the what's Adams' first name? Douglas Adams. No, Sam Adams' nephew or whatever it was, right? Totally can't remember his name. He figures into the revolution, obviously. But they were always fighting. Hamilton, of course, got in there. He got shot for it. But they would publish their commentary and their public brawls, their Twitter wars in local publications, probably printed by the likes of Benjamin Franklin. So they would write with pseudonyms and they would present their different cases. Then you could publish a pamphlet or two. Pamphlets were very popular back then. Yeah, so there's been always this desire to shape and craft and alter public opinion, and so Edward Bernays really just made it into an industrial complex. If I take a political spectrum quiz, which I just did the other day, it was unfortunately only kind of a left-right quiz. It was a Pew, whatever, PEW, Pew Foundation or whatever it is. So it wasn't a great test. I think it was 16 questions. I don't really find that to be granular enough. But I show up right in the middle. The thing that gets lost in the quiz like this, though, anytime you take a political quiz, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? I'm on the left, if you will, the traditional left on some things, the traditional right on others. So I am an average, I'm a centrist. But I opine depending on the circumstances. This is the way most people are. But for the sake of expediency, maybe simplicity, we must line up behind a single representative or president or whomever from one of the two parties. Having a third or fourth or other parties is ridiculous. Can't do that. So we have to accept the negatives. I only agree with you like 10%, but I don't like the other party, so therefore I have to accept the bad with the good. It's unfortunate that that's the way the system is put together. I can't say I'm a huge fan of a parliamentary approach, the building of a government coalition as a part of the process. I think those sort of emerge and can change over time. I'm kind of on the fence about having political parties in general. I am curious, although I've not really delved into this too much, like what is it about the way our system must work where political parties end up winning? Well, obviously it's money. Each political party, the DNC, the RNC, these are companies. They're business. They're all about money and funding campaigns and staying in power and so on. So their agenda is not necessarily your agenda, but they get people to exercise their tribal emotional connections. I have to be a part of this team and that team. And they've turned our American political system into basically a sporting event, sometimes wrestling. Always something like football, but sometimes more like wrestling, world wrestling. Is it real? I don't know. Probably not. So I think a lot of this us-them stuff, it only helps to foment unification behind a particular agenda, which for each party could be a matter of a power grab. Sometimes it's a little bit more optimistic than that, but I don't know. There's now the horseshoe argument, and I'll leave that for you to search. But it's the extreme left and right end up being closer together because the spectrum is really shaped like a horseshoe, right? Now, historically, you can say that the extreme left and right, because it's not really a line but a circle, that yes, eventually both go towards some sort of anarchy or dictatorship. So conservatives, if they're truly small government, they would move towards anarchy, and if a extreme left position being strong government would eventually move towards dictatorial or authoritarian, right? But basically, dictators and autocrats are so unpopular that eventually government fails, and you end up with no government either way, or something like that. So that's from high school government class, and it wasn't well taught, so I'm not well telling it. But the horseshoe theory lately probably holds water, as long as the horseshoe is pointing up into the future. So of course, history always adds another day every day, and tomorrow, what may come. Into the future, I am working on a civic volunteer community elevation entity. I've talked about this before, called Innovate for Vegas. Innovate for Vegas Foundation, in fact, and part of the early lesson learned, again, is to focus on local first, or as I repeat frequently, bottom up. While profound impact can be observed and worse, discovered long after the fact, that is to say, oh, look at what other damage was done by trickle-down economics. From the chicanery at the top, regardless of political parties and other chaos, individual influence is more likely to make a difference in your locality. obviously your neighborhoods, but city council, be involved in city government in some way, county commission, etc. Right. So being more local means you probably know the people that you are working with and for, and you know what's going on. You understand things. What you end up with, unfortunately, is a lot of city council folks are real estate agents, and they become motivated to be involved in more real estate dealings, or it doesn't have to be real estate specifically, but it's usually something in that realm where being able to craft local policies ends up benefiting them in some way. So you always have to look for local corruption, but guess what? You can go and sit in your city council meeting much more easily than going and sitting in on a congressional hearing. So yeah, think local first. And so I think there is more opportunity to affect change, or to at least be more aware of direct impact from local decision making, local decision makers, and people in your locality who either participate or react because they don't participate or don't pay attention. So, but all of these things are a little bit more feasible. Can something be more feasible? They're feasible at local scale to attempt to be more involved, engaged, aware, right? To do that at the national level, the federal government is too big to fail? Is a gargantuan. What is it? It's the largest single employer on the planet, I believe. If you treat all agencies as one employer, so yeah, it's big. It's vast and nearly impossible to understand, and almost as difficult, perhaps, as the impact that voting for one candidate over another, whichever branch of government you're talking about, will have unforeseen consequences long into the future, or will have no impact whatsoever. And how do you even know? So information awareness is a huge problem. Really, if climate change and the economy, whatever the economy is for individual people, I'm sure everybody has a different take. But the economy, immigration policy, for examples, can be considered top-tier concerns of the electorate, of course. The overriding concern should be how information is received and considered about any of these. What do you may have an opinion about climate change, but what do you really know about climate change, or the economy, or immigration policy, or any of a vast array of nationally decided, legislated, regulated, adjudicated issues that impact basically the entire population, or at least half of it in some cases. So how do you learn about what's happening so that you can even have an opinion, much less consider some sort of a decision regarding supporting of a particular opinion? Getting discoverable and verifiable information into the public consciousness might be easier at local scale. So that's one of the things we're working on. And this is it's something worth doing, I think, although we can reach out to other localities and work on it across the country, but focused on how do things work in your own backyard, right? How do you interact with people that you see every day, that you can talk to, that you can walk past, that you can encounter in a coffee shop or in a grocery store, etc. This is something that is completely left out of the picture when you have national political figures conducting their business and negotiations and politics in general. Unless they're campaigning, then they will tell us. So how often are either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump going to show up in Pennsylvania or here in Vegas or in Michigan, right? Well, let's see, after January. Somebody should have a counter. I'm sure somebody does somewhere. You can determine how many times. And now they're busy, of course, but there's always time for engagement with actual people when they are voters and there's an election coming up. That seems to fade away into the darkness. Why is there not a fireside chat in this modern era? Any person, and you see AOC doing this. She does TikTok videos, she does live streams, she does actual interaction with people. That may well be, and it doesn't have to be politically party oriented, that may well be the way for people in national politics to engage with their constituency, is to have these conversations using the modern technologies at our disposal to actually remain in contact with a human level of contact, not a form letter, not a mailbox filled with political propaganda for the upcoming election from all parties, the big ones and the little ones, etc. So, how does the U.S. Postal Service stay in business? Junk mail. That's a known. Yeah, so information awareness is a huge problem, and it's something that we're looking at, and hopefully others will join in that exploration. Local news websites and local news business and companies and so on, they've, for the most part, lost their way. It's very tricky. They always have, first of all, they have a political agenda, leanings of whatever direction, or they try to be independent, and that's fine. But getting those endeavors sustainable requires either leaning heavily into ridiculous advertising or taking subscribers and keeping a very lean operation and so on. And I worked at salon.com. It was a very interesting, definitely left-leaning publication. It had been around for a long time, and total chaos. So media organizations run as businesses is really tricky. And I only have that one example, but I have to imagine it's not getting any easier. And for the bigger companies, it's even more difficult. So thinking locally and starting on the ground with actual human interaction where things really matter, right? Potholes, not a presidential issue, but most definitely an issue for people in a particular neighborhood where their cars get destroyed. So there's a neighborhood in, was it East Vegas? Somewhere in East, where was it? Somewhere kind of east of UNLV, if you're familiar with the greater Vegas area. They decided to fix their own potholes, and they made the news because that's so crazy, because nobody else was going to fix them. That's how local issues get resolved. So roll your sleeves up and do it yourself. Harder to do with border walls and changing interest rates for most. Above all else, I think the take home for me this many years in, and hopefully I'm about halfway, especially regarding being a part of a political party and buying what they are selling, regardless, that is drinking the Kool-Aid, or reality, drinking the Flavor Aid. I will quote a well-known political scientist and social philosopher, Chris Rock. Anyone who makes up their mind about an issue before they hear the issue is a fool. And that's my take on political parties. So yeah, I'm kind of in the center, but that's not really true. It depends on what the issue is. Tell me what you think about the economy. What is your plan? And I know people, they don't say anything. I don't really want to comment too much on the current state of affairs because I don't want to delve into politics with quabbling sand. It's not really about that. So how I got here is fine, but really when you think about it, as a voter or as a participant in our society, a basic understanding of certain things will go a long way. If you understand that you do not lay a match down on a flammable thing, don't throw the cigarette butt or extinguished match into a trash can full of shredded paper, whatever it is, right? Like these little tidbits that we should be picking up along the way help us get through life. And I think some of them should be a little bit more technical, like how do tariffs work? Or what does it mean to put caps on pricing? So I picked one from each of the major two parties, right? So no mention of Lena Khan and the FTC. I'm a fan of what she's doing, although the FTC is hobbled by under-resource, and they have to take legal action against entities because they have no regulatory powers. So if there was some, and of course, big business, so the donor class is not fond of being regulated. So depending on who wins this election, you'll either see maybe more action along the lines of consumer protections. It may or may not be Lena Khan because the donor class does not like her personally, but she is an out-of-box thinker who is motivated to look out for the consumer. That's us. So perfect? No, but somebody is actually looking at grocery price gouging. What does it mean to have inflation versus gouging, right? You can, it's just inflation. It's just inflation. Well, how come your profits are going up? Prices and profits going up. That's not inflation. That's gouging. You are taking advantage of the headlines. The housing market in Nevada is chaotic. In Vegas specifically, it's problematic. There's a disconnect between local government drive towards economic diversity by trying to make Vegas, the Las Vegas area, the next Silicon Valley and Hollywood 2.0, and a center for medical research and a new medical school. Ooh, they want to do a lot of stuff. I wonder if that will gentrify the area and force people who are now the primary enablers of the fun economy. We know what the fun economy is, right? It's professional gaming. It's, professional sports, gaming, not hospitality, tourism, gaming, professional sports, tourism. That means just people visiting here for whatever reason. Entertainment, so residences and so on, and conventions, the fun economy. People that are enabling that would be priced out in a gentrification scheme. So if you're not looking at servicing everyone who lives in a locality, but only your special interests, then you will reap the rewards. And I just finished Lost in Austin, which tells the tale of the city of Austin as it moved into its, hey, we're the next Silicon Valley phase, where all of the artists and all the creative people and whatnot got priced out. So you have to live far out of town to be a part of the Austin economy. And unless you're in the tech sector and you were flying on the Nerdbird and so on. So this long-term considerations and what does it really mean when this happens and how is this going to impact me? It should be a question of what do I know before, not what happens to me and I'm left wondering what hit me? Why are prices going up 5x or whatever, right? So I think being a better informed, and this is of course production by Street. This is of course if you saw the HBO series Newsroom, the sort of the clip that was heard around the world. Jeff Daniels does his monologue about how we're not the greatest country in the world anymore, and he goes into some of the accomplishments of the United States through history, and he says something like, the reason we were able to do all these things is because we were informed. And that is probably no longer the case. For the embarrassment of riches that we have before us and the ways of accessing information and analysis and experts who are willing to share their opinions and whatnot, there's always a question about agenda, and there's always a concern about veracity, truth. And I find that troubling. But we'll see what can happen in the next coming days, weeks, months, years, decades. Hopefully I have a few more to ponder, and I'll make another version of this video. This video. I'll make another version of this presentation. So we're at episode 51 today. So figure 2051? No. Somewhere in the future, I will hopefully revisit this particular topic because it is one that interests me now, this many years later, this many years in. And I think we can do better. That's all I have to say. Thank you. Don't forget, buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo, Ko-fi.com, ko-fi.com/DanHugo. You don't have to spend any money, but you can figure out what else I'm working on. That's all I got. Take care. Good luck. Don't forget to vote.